Hi there, I'm Robin Wrigley-Carr and I'm on the ENS Exec. Good to have someone from Down Under. And I'm thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Michael O'Sullivan, who has many leadership positions in the field of spirituality studies. They include being co-founder and director of the Spirituality Institute for Research and Education in Dublin, a research fellow at the University of the Free State, South Africa, founding member of the Spirituality Studies Research Group at SETU, and a member of the Executive Committee of the International Network for the Study of Spirituality. Michael's lecture is entitled Authentic Subjectivity and Spirituality in the University. So help me welcome Michael to give his presentation.
Thanks very much, everybody. So, just give them a minute. Okay. Okay. Well, that sets the scene there in that slide for you. You can read that there for yourselves. That's our context. Okay. So, on May the 1st, 2022, the South East Technological University, SETU, became the only university in Ireland where MA and PhD studies in spirituality are studied and are offered, and where there is a research group for spirituality studies and a research fellow who will work with my colleague Dr. Bernadette Flanagan to produce the Routledge International Handbook of Contemplative Methods for the Study of Spirituality, which is due out in spring 2024, and there are flyers about that forthcoming publication available at this conference. Universities like SETU prepare people to be scholars, researchers and professionals related to the themes we live in. At least that's the hope. And so the title of our conference, Spirituality, Critical Reflection and Professional Practice in an Uncertain World, is very relevant to those engaged in spirituality, education and research in a university setting. My focus in this paper is on spirituality in the university, and specifically on how it can be a critically reflective university discipline to serve the world. To begin then, I want to make a few distinctions about spirituality, and I call it S1, S2 and S3. S1 refers to what can be called the spirit of a foundational, permeating and self-transcending sensibility and capacity in people, which moves them as embodied and socially situated to desire, seek and enact deep meaning, purpose and connection for their own lives, the lives of others, and the world. On this view, we are all spiritual in virtue of how we exist as human. A second referent for spirituality, it refers to the myriad ways that people experience and give concrete expression to this core, desiring and transforming spirit. They do so in relationships, written texts, art, music, traditions, institutions, organizations, practices, religious commitments, ways of life, and so on. Or they distort the character of that spirit in what they create or produce. S3 refers to the academic discipline that studies S1 and S2. And my focus in this presentation is on S3, and it will frame my treatment of S1, which is about being spiritual by nature, and S2, the ways in which we express that natural makeup that we have. In 2008, I wrote an article entitled Spirituality, a New Academic Discipline. And in the article, I identified 6 signs of a new academic discipline. 1, the number of voices in the academy claiming that such a phenomenon was occurring. 2, the number of scholars and practitioners working in third-level colleges who began to self-identify what they did in terms of the new discipline. 3, new academic publications, books, dictionaries, series and journals specific to the new discipline. 4, the creation of distinctive societies of scholars and practitioners of the emerging discipline, like ourselves here. 5, the holding of major conferences in the emerging discipline. And 6, the establishment of departments, programs of study, third level awards and research units in the new discipline, that if those 6 criteria could be found to be there, you could say then that there is a new academic discipline, and the new academic discipline did meet these criteria, and so it could be said to be a new academic discipline. That was 2008. I then provided evidence in the article to show that spirituality met those criteria and so could be regarded as a new academic discipline. For example, regarding major conferences, the first conference in Europe on the academic study of spirituality took place in Middletown Institute in Dublin, where Bernadette and I worked. That was just 4 years before the article was published, therefore. It drew an international set of participants from so many countries. The main organiser was my colleague, Dr. Bernadette Flanagan, and I was on the organising committee with her. So that was 2004. It was the first academic discipline for the study of spirituality in Europe. It took place in Dublin. Okay. Challenges for the new academic discipline. As well as meeting the criteria for being a new academic discipline, spirituality in university settings must also address the challenges it faces as a relatively new discipline. And these challenges, as I would see it anyway, have to do with identity, integrity, inclusivity, and objectivity. Identity. A new academic discipline has to have a distinctive field of study. It has to have a field of study that corresponds to it. And it also has to have a distinctive way of studying the field. And we'll look and see later about that. Secondly, the challenge of integrity. Besides the 2 issues of identity I've just mentioned, spirituality as a university discipline, it also faces a third challenge: how to preserve its integrity by not denying its self-implicating character. The self-implicating character of spirituality is illustrated in what Marlon Brando is reputed to have said when he was dying. What was that all about? Because of our spiritual core, we experience our lives against the backdrop of questions like, who am I? Where have I come from? Why did I come to be? Where am I going when I die? As inevitably I will. Sometimes these personal self-implicating questions loom large for us, while much of the time they lie in slumber deep. Because this journey into the mystery of our lives and the life of the world is not neutral for us, disciplines that study it, like spirituality, cannot be true to themselves if they try to be value-free. And this brings us on to the notion of objectivity. This refusal of spirituality as an academic discipline to adopt a supposedly detached stance in order to preserve its integrity brings us to a fourth challenge for spirituality in the university and the academy, namely how to reconcile subjectivity and objectivity. This point about how to be subjective objectively means too that it is not enough for spirituality to be a critically thinking discipline. Critical thinking needs to be exercised under the methodological control of how to be objective. And I will return to this point later. Then there is the challenge, of course, of inclusivity. In today's world, spirituality in the university also needs to be studied in a way that can include everyone, while at the same time providing for the differences that do exist between, for example, people who live by a religious spirituality and those who are spiritual but not religious. One implication of this position is that spirituality studies can no longer necessarily be, as they were in the past, theology-led or religiously affiliated. Theology and religious affiliation have roles to play, but they must play them in ways that can persuade and relate in an open way to all the other resources that can shed light on the subject area. They can't be presumed to dominate them. Spirituality and, as well as catering for the different spirituality life views, the inclusive character of spirituality as a university discipline must also cater for the rapidly growing phenomenon of spirituality and, as I call it, which is the most striking development in the discipline in the years since my 2008 article. The descriptor spirituality and refers to spirituality in healthcare, and this conference is an exact example of it. Spirituality in healthcare, spirituality in business, spirituality in counselling, spirituality in art, spirituality in leadership, and you can keep name going on. The Routledge International Handbook of Spirituality, Handbook of Spirituality in Society and the Professions, with its 51 chapters on spirituality and different professions, which was launched here in 2019, and which my colleague Bernadette co-edited, provides compelling evidence of the spread of spirituality studies and research into virtually every area of human endeavour. This conference too is evidence of that phenomenon. My way of addressing these issues of identity, integrity, objectivity and inclusivity for spirituality as a critically reflective professional discipline in the university and for lived experience is by means of what I call the methodology of authentic subjectivity. My approach owes much to the work of Bernard Lonergan, a Canadian Jesuit who died in 1984, before spirituality began to develop as a university discipline. And so I've tried to draw on his writings, if you like, to have them serve the notion of spirituality as an academic discipline. In order to explain what I mean by authentic subjectivity, I invite you to verify it for yourself. It's not just an idea. To verify it for yourself by engaging with me in an imaginative experiment. So we will engage in practice. Imagine that each of us, listening to this lecture, is sitting quietly in a public park when suddenly there is a sound, like a child's cry for help. Focus in this experiment, imaginative experiment, on what goes on in you. So the focus is on what is going on inside you as you hear this cry for help. And this now is an exercise to discover that we're constituted in a certain way, and that's what will lead me on to say what I mean by authentic subjectivity. So let's take a few moments. Put yourself into that scene. You're in that park. There's a cry for help from a child. You're sitting there quietly. What happens inside you? This is an exercise now in self-attention. A lot of the time we're just running around the place, but if we can kind of be reflexive and notice what's happening within. If we are attentive to our experience, we will hear the cry. It's not guaranteed you'll even hear it, but we will hear the cry. And bodily reactions, images and feelings to do with what might be happening will arise in all of us, which shows that our self-presence is not self-enclosed, but is inherently receptive and relational in character. John Swinton spoke much yesterday about relationality and spirituality. So how do we respond from within this self-presence to, first of all, our experiencing of the cry? So there is an experience, and we start with the experience, and we're self-present in a way that allows us to experience. And then from that position, something else happens. We don't just stay static. We're moved to go beyond it, Do we ignore the cry and push the images and feelings that come with it away? Or are we moved to attend more acutely to the cry? So you notice in yourself, what was your reaction? Did you find yourself moving towards the cry or wanting to move away from it? But you do find that there is this movement from the experience to another stage. If the latter, do we find ourselves moved from within beyond the experience of hearing the cry to a higher form of self-presence that enables us not only to attend to the data of the cry, but also to seek an understanding of it by asking questions like, what does the sound I have heard mean? Did you find yourself moved onto this stage now of seeking an understanding of your experience? Does it mean that someone is in trouble? Or does it mean, for example, that there might be a play, a drama group nearby, and who are practicing their roles? And it's not very serious there for this cry. But you can see there are different possible explanations. And there is a desire to understand. And so now the next step is, if I find that there are different possible explanations for my experience, in my desire to understand it correctly, I'm moved to judgment. So you're moved, first of all, you're in experience, you're moved from there into understanding, and now you're moved on to judging, because that's the only way you can get to distinguish between the explanation that's correct and the one that isn't. Given that both interpretations are possible, do we find ourselves being pushed, pulled, or attracted to move on to a higher level again in ourselves, where we are engaged in not only understanding, but also critical understanding, where we find ourselves judging between different possible interpretations? By making the inner move to judge which understanding of the situation is correct, we have entered a self-transcending and critically reflective self-presence, or subjectivity, that relates to reality out of a desire for truth. Do I find that I'm in myself in a way that desires to reach the truth? Staying with our practice of self-attention to our lived experience in the park, do we find that the unfolding spirited desire at work in us does not leave us content with coming to know what is happening, but continues to prod us until we decide to act in a way that is consistent with our knowledge? Isn't that true? You don't find yourself saying, now I know this cry is for real, there's something happening to a child here. Gee, that's very interesting. So do we find that we're moved to go further? We have to do something. So we're not content with coming to know what is happening, but we find ourselves moved to go further, to decide to act in a way that is consistent with our knowledge. For example, if we discover that someone really is in trouble, there arises within us, when our experiencing, interpreting, judging, and deciding are functioning as they can, at the standard that they can function, and are not being derailed by factors that can get in the way, a desire or an imperative that we do something about that situation by, for example, calling the police or seeking the help of others who are also in the park arises in us. At that point, we are grounded in a quality of sensibility and self-transcendence that relates to reality, not just now out of a desire to reach the truth, but out of a desire to be also a good person and to enact goodness in the situation. We may also find our desire to do good emanating from a still deeper ground in our subjectivity, the ground to be loving. Our participation, therefore, in the illustrative imagination experiment, when we participate reflexively, where we're kind of self-attending, discloses that we connect with reality methodologically, not by bypassing our subjectivity, as though reality was already out there now waiting to be looked at. We reach reality by participating authentically in our subjectivity. Participating authentically in our subjectivity means we journey to truth and the good to be done consistent with it through our subjectivity, through getting into ourselves, engaged in experiencing, questioning, interpreting, judging, deliberating and deciding. We've got to get right in there, not try and get away from ourselves. Participating in our subjectivity under the impact of the foundational, desiring, permeating, dynamic and exigent spirit of authenticity means something different depending on whether we are engaged in experiencing, understanding, judging or deciding, which are all constitutive of the methodological process of common human knowing and choosing. Authenticity, in other words, is a multi-level interrelated reality. When experiencing, what does authenticity mean when we're experiencing? At that level, researchers can detect the spirit of authenticity at work in their embodied and socially situated self as a call from inner depths to attend to all relevant data. The data about the situation they are present to, but also the data about the quality of their self-presence, of their presence to themselves, through which they attend to the situation. Our only access to the situation is through ourselves, and if we're impaired in any way, our access to what's there is impaired also. When engaged in the activity of understanding, authenticity is detected in an inner call to raise all the relevant questions. So in experiencing, you're attending to data, but at the level of understanding, you're asking questions. And you want to raise all the relevant questions about the situation and about ourselves seeking understanding. Because we can't raise all the relevant questions if there are things in ourselves that are blocking us from being able to do so. So it's a twofold process all the time. When engaged in judging, the desiring spirit of authenticity is detected in the form of an inner exigency to go beyond the different possible interpretations that critical thinking can produce at the level of understanding by weighing up these interpretations at a more discriminating level of critical thinking and settling only for what is true or probably true. And when engaged in deciding, the spirit of authenticity is detected in an inherent desire to not settle for what is convenient or expedient, but to seek to enact what is truly good and perhaps to even love unconditionally. So you can see that each step of the way we are becoming a certain kind of person by the way we respond or do not respond to the situations we're in. In the exercise of these operations, in every instance, we are being called to act in fidelity to the unfolding spirit of authenticity as our desiring ground and normative guide. The effort and commitment to do so makes us ask and answer along the journey of our lives, what am I saying about myself and making of myself and the world in the way I attend or refuse to attend to experience, question or refuse to question experience, judge or refuse to judge my understanding about my experience and that of others, decide to act or not on the basis of my judgment, and become or refuse to become a better and more loving person. We receive, relate to, reflect on and respond to ourselves, each other and the wider world through how faithful we are or are not to this normative, dynamic and methodological desiring spirit of authenticity at the core of ourselves as human. In the case of our imaginative experiment, fidelity to the dynamic spirit of authenticity in our subjectivity transforms us from being a person caught up in recreational activity originally. We were in the park kind of taking time out, recreational activity, let's say, initially, and we're moved then into one caught up in researching and addressing a situation that may involve the well-being of others. This discovery also shows that being a good researcher goes beyond professional training and education to the level of authenticity in the researcher as a person. You might have all the research capability in the world, but if you're not a kind of a person who desires truth and goodness and love in your research, then you sort of don't really progress. You have the capabilities to research, but to progress as a researcher, but your kind of person keeps you back. Being an authentic researcher requires personal development as well as professional training. Without the former, the personal development, we may not be committed to go with the desire, the dynamic desire for authenticity in our subjectivity, and without the latter, the professional training, we may lack the professional know-how to do so in ways that can be effective for the situation we are faced with. The situation of the cry for help that I presented did not take place in a professional role context, but professional practice employs the very same operations of knowing and choosing, and are governed by the same spirit that we discovered in our imaginative experiment. Consider, for example, the nurse who attends to a patient's medical needs, and knows how to read a treatment plan, give injections and medications or do dressings, etc., and the spiritual carer who attends to the meaning-making questions raised by health challenges and knows how to listen and respond appropriately. Both attend to data and process the data, arrive at understandings and interpretations, and make judgments and take decisions in the context of what their respective professional role and training calls for. They practice their professions, medical nurse or the spiritual carer, in different realms of knowledge and from different specializations, but both are needed to offer holistic care. Not only that, their professional practice in each case becomes spiritual practice when it is grounded in fidelity to the exigent desire of the spirit of authenticity to let beauty, truth, goodness and love prevail always in ways appropriate to the exercise of their professional practice. When I worked as a missionary in Chile in the 1980s, the military dictatorship relied on the medical knowledge of some doctors to guide them as to how far to go with torture techniques. That is a clear example of where professional practice was not grounded in the spirit of authenticity and its horizon of beauty, truth, goodness and love. Now, as well as functioning in an upward movement, which is what we've been focusing on so far, that is to say, the movement from experience through understanding, judgment, and onto decision-making, the interrelated process of experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding under the impact of the spirit of authenticity also works in the reverse order. It also operates by attracting us to start the process with a decision, to believe or trust, and to descend from there through judgment and understanding to a terminal point in lived experience. For example, similar to Dag Hammarskjöld, the late and inspiring Secretary General of the United Nations, who once said that at some moment he decided to say yes to someone with a capital S or something with a capital S, and that made all the difference for his life from then on, he said, the spirituality researcher may decide, firstly, to trust that God exists and is a God of love, and secondly, on the basis of that yes, make the judgment of belief that there could be an incarnation as a self-communication of God's love to and for the world, and thirdly, on the basis of that judgment of belief in such a God, seek to work out an understanding of how the maleness of Jesus is also liberating for women. And fourthly, on the basis of that understanding of the maleness of Jesus, seek to communicate with people's lived experience regarding the situation of women in ways that can enlighten and transform it. We live our lives with a spirit of authenticity that functions with both modes of knowing and deciding for the sake of advancing concrete expressions of its correlative objects of beauty, truth, goodness and love. The methodology is also subject to inauthenticity, of course. It must be added, of course, as I indicated by referencing my experience in Chile, that the dynamic spirit of authenticity and human subjectivity has to contend with forces of inauthenticity. What Dr. Cheryl Hunt might call internal and external dragons, she does in her book, these can exist in individuals in the form, for example, of the refusal to be open to all relevant data when experiencing, because of fear or prejudice or whatever, the refusal to raise all relevant questions regarding the data when engaged in understanding, in order to avoid potential self-implicating challenges to their positions, and the willingness when engaged in judging to settle for false interpretations and to make choices that are simply self-serving when faced with making decisions regarding the good to be done. These counter-forces in individuals may be due not only to the way individuals are in themselves, but also the pressures exerted on them from outside, in the form, for example, of constraints imposed by the culture, institutions, organisations, or groups in which they participate. The methodology is also a communal achievement. The achievement of how authentic people can be in their self-presence to themselves, others, and the world is not only a personal but also a communal achievement. The communal achievement will include the fund of favourable experiences, favourable socialisation, favourable circumstances in a person and a population, and the level of development of historical knowledge in a given era. This communal achievement may be needed at times to correct individual experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding, but it may also, of course, need at times to self-correct in the light of the impact on it of individual attentiveness, insights, judgments, and decisions regarding where authenticity lies. There is major and minor inauthenticity and major and minor authenticity. Minor inauthenticity is when there are issues going on with the individual that mean the person doesn't function authentically in their experiencing, understanding, judging, deciding. Major inauthenticity is when we are participating in institutions and organisations and traditions that are actually formed by experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding. It didn't attend to all the data, didn't ask all the relevant questions, got distorted and so on, and then people got socialised into the distortion, that got passed on and so on. Authenticity being a communal achievement means that it is not something we arrive at heroically by our own efforts, as though the innate spirit of authenticity in individuals could carry all before it by some automatic mechanism or sheer force of will. It is instead an inherently relational process that is affected by the impact on us of others in our lives, the structures we are part of, and the historical fund of what is available for us to draw on. The methodology may lead to religious regrounding, the methodology of authentic subjectivity. It is also more than an achievement. To some extent, it is a gifted outcome, authentic subjectivity. What in the Christian tradition would be called a graced outcome. By that I mean that some of what facilitates or sustains authenticity in a life or professional practice can come to us through breakthrough experiences of giftedness at unexpected depths. Many people have had this gifted experience of something outside the world coming in, often unexpectedly, to meet them at soul depth. Those who undergo such experiences find their common human spirit of authenticity, which guides their experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding, has to be regrounded, so to speak, on this elevating, mysterious foundation and its horizon of beauty, intelligibility, truth, goodness, and love. Some believe at such times they have come into communion with God, the divine, the absolute loving mystery of goodness at the heart of life, however this mystery is named, that they've met something much more than might have been expected. I referred already to Hammarskjöld's experience, but his encounter was with a mystery that had no name, a someone or something as he termed it. I offer now an example from my own life where the encounter with the mystery, with a capital M, was more clearly connected with a socialised religious affiliation. And I was asked last night about Joan, I think, what keeps me going, or what explains me, basically. And here's a bit of it. While my brother, sister and I were small children, my father, on arriving home in the evenings, would come and say good night to us. On one of those nights, when I was aged, I think 5 or 6, he asked us had we said our night prayers, and I answered that I had a toothache. Given the culture of the time, my father might have responded, "But Michael, we are talking about praying to God, and could you not do that even with a toothache?" But instead, he replied that I did not have to say my prayers then, as God would understand how I was feeling. Utterly unexpectedly, his words immediately impacted on me in a way that led to a deep, warm, peaceful experience. I experienced myself in my embodied consciousness being reassured, being cared for. I experienced that my pain mattered, that I mattered to God. I experienced and understood that God was a kind God. And we talked about kindness here, and Philip did in the last session. That God was a kind God, and that this profound realization was being gifted to me at a profound level in myself and from beyond myself in this world. Now, reflecting on what happened that evening in later life has enabled me to identify that this experience regarding the reality of God as a God of kindness, compassion, care, understanding, was so powerfully transformative in my subjectivity that it became a foundational criterion for me in how to be an authentic human being. What was in line with that experience could be trusted, and whatever contradicted it had to be rejected or opposed. For example, my decision to go to Chile in the early 1980s as a missionary to tackle the brutal military dictatorship of General Pinochet, who claimed to be a loyal Catholic, was influenced by my desire to mediate the kind God of my childhood into the Chile situation for the sake of its transformation. As well as experiences like those of Hammarskjöld and me, the route for some to a spirituality of authenticity rooted in a religious character can be that of reflecting on the reality of the mysterious existence of our spirit of authenticity. The great German Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner held that if God wished to reveal God's self to us, then God must have created us with the capacity to receive, recognize, and respond to God's love, to the offer of God's love. On this basis, some may decide that their desiring and self-transcending spirit of authenticity, drawing them towards beauty, intelligibility, goodness, and love in life, for their own life and the life of the world, can be trusted to be an implicit desire for God in the very nature of their humanity, and so understand their lived responses to that gifted desire as a self-giving to God through how they live their lives. Having articulated what I mean by the practice of authentic subjectivity, which can and does function in us in an upward movement from experience to termination in a decision to be implemented, as was the case in our imaginative experiment, or in a downward movement from decision that terminates in experience, as was the case of Hammarskjöld, for example, we can now return to the issues of identity, integrity, objectivity and inclusivity that were referred to earlier as issues to be met for the sake of the standing of spirituality as a critically reflective discipline in the university and the academy. You will have noticed that these issues received some attention already in the course of our study of the imaginative experience and my explanation of authentic subjectivity, but now let's get more into it. Regarding the two identity issues of spirituality as an academic discipline stated early on in my presentation, the first question becomes, how does the methodology of authentic subjectivity establish the scope of the field of spirituality studies? Its material object, if you like. Academic disciplines tend to form around distinctive material as their object of study. For example, English literature studies, poetry, prose and plays, etc. Math studies, numbers, calculus and canon law, etc. But the position I'm arguing for in the case of spirituality equations, etc., and theology studies the Bible, church history, and canon law, etc. But the position I'm arguing for in the case of spirituality as an academic discipline is that it forms its field of study not by sectioning off material that others can agree identifies the field of that discipline, but through what self-attention discloses when people are engaged in the lived practice of knowing and choosing in any field of material, be it knowing and choosing in the field of literature, maths, theology, etc. Self-attention to what is going on inside the person while engaged in knowing and choosing in any field of inquiry, teaching, research, and professional practice shows that the desiring spirit of authenticity in the subjectivity of people functions in every one of those fields of inquiry and action, and therefore in every profession, in every discipline, and in the whole gamut of lived experience. In other words, when spirituality as an academic discipline is conceived in terms of the study of the spirit of authenticity, in the knowing and choosing of embodied and socially situated concrete persons, its field of study is all-encompassing. Nothing is outside its scope of study. The field is correlative with the reach of the spirit of authenticity, and its reach is unlimited. It's interested in everything. Identity, how to study the field. The methodology of authentic subjectivity also answers the second question raised earlier, namely, how is the vast field of spirituality to be studied? How is it to be studied? Which is to say, what are we looking for when studying what comes within the field, and what guides us when choosing resources to find what we seek? To answer that twofold question, it is helpful to distinguish between doing and making. Studying what lies within the field of spirituality in terms of the methodology of authentic subjectivity involves studying the quality of what individuals and collectives do, namely experience, understand, judge and decide, and what they make, namely meaning, in the form of lives, texts, traditions, universities, etc. If people's meaning making is studied in terms of the presence or absence of authenticity in their experiencing, understanding, judging and deciding, that is their quality of doing in making meaning, and in terms of how well the meaning object they express or enact in particular instances correlates with the beauty, intelligibility, truth, goodness or love that the spirit of authenticity in their subjectivity desires in those instances, then the study is spirituality study. For example, a researcher studying the life and work of Karl Marx as an exercise in the study of spirituality would start by seeking to find in Marx's life the writings and find in Marx's life and writings evidence of his presence to the dynamic spirit of authenticity in his subjectivity, and to identify what the meaning object of that desiring spirit is for him. Evidence of this spirit and what for him, for Marx, it desires is evident in the essay he wrote when leaving school at 17 years of age. He wrote, "The main principle which must guide us in the selection of a vocation is the welfare of humanity. If a person works only for himself or herself, they can perhaps be a famous scholar, a great wise person, a distinguished poet, but never a complete, genuinely great person. When we have chosen the vocation in which we can contribute most to humanity, burdens cannot bend us because they are sacrifices for all." We see here that Marx is conceiving spirituality, is conceiving fidelity to his spirit of authenticity as a vocation, as he calls it, to the welfare of humanity as its object of meaning and value, which is to be lived out, as he puts it, no matter what the cost, which evokes Jesus and the cross. But because he sought to live out his call to enact such meaning in a historical context where the collective of the Christian religion at that time did not, as he saw it, support his call and even opposed it, he gradually moved to becoming an atheist. Just 1 year later he wrote, He's now only 18. Never can I be at peace, for my soul is powerfully driven. There had to be some fault in the universe, the dumb agony of pain wrapped all round her. The world which bulks between me and the abyss, I will smash to pieces with my enduring curses. I'll throw my arms around its harsh reality, which evokes the image of Samson in the Bible, bringing down the pillars. We roar our melancholy hymns to the Creator, he says, with scorn on our brows. Chained, eternally chained, eternally. We are the apes of a cold God. Now, he lived in an area where a quarter of the population lived in public alms, and clearly it seems he was very affected by this. And so for him, he couldn't understand how the Christian religion at the time would not have been more engaged with this kind of issue. And because it wasn't for him, because he wasn't doing that, for him then, this is a cold God, the God of the Christian tradition. And if you're going to believe in the welfare of humanity as he wanted to do, he had to go a different way. Marx's passionate, soulful words as a young man express what can be called his spirituality, understood as a determined and sustained desire to live authentically in and in relation to the world of his time, a vocation, as he put it, to express and enact meaning that would serve the welfare of humanity. The spirituality researcher would also seek to track Marx's fidelity or infidelity to this conversion in the course of his life and work. Such research would call for knowledge of the world from which his writings emerged, knowledge of the world he sought to project forward in his writings, and knowledge of the world that came into being beyond his writings. In the light of that hermeneutical triangle of historical worlds, the spirituality researcher would attend to the quality of Marx's attention to data when experiencing, the quality of his questioning when engaged in understanding, the quality of his interpreting when judging, and the quality of his deliberating when deciding. In this way, the researcher could be led to hold that Marx's spirit of authenticity was thrown off course by his historical conditioning, because he failed to see the potential in Christianity to be a resource for social transformation. He did not differentiate between Christianity as he knew it and Christianity as it was meant to be. For example, he did not foresee the developments that would take place in Christianity with the emergence of liberation, spirituality and theology in the 1960s. The Conference of Catholic Bishops had made a Gene Columbia in 1968. These developments moved the Catholic Church in Latin America and beyond to a preferential option for the economically poor. Thousands of Christians were martyred for their faith-based stance for the welfare of their people in Latin America in the years after Medellin, an outcome which would have seemed impossible to Marx in his day. Fidelity to the spirit of authenticity as the way to study Marx's life and work in terms of how I conceive spirituality would call for positions based on his work to be revised in the light of having to take into account the new data, understanding, judgments and decisions regarding authentic Christianity's potential for and actualization of social transformation that emerged after his death. Regarding spirituality's need to preserve its integrity, which was another issue we identified while functioning in the Academy, we can hold that recourse to personal experience and acceptance of self-implication as a valid, value-laden way of proceeding are in keeping with the discipline's desire to reach the truth and do the good. To reach the truth and do the good doesn't mean that you have to put aside all subjectivity, all values, all that. They are so, only though as long as what guides the researcher is not a self-enclosed subjectivism, but an experiencing, understanding, judging and deciding subjectivity that is opened out in the quality of its receptivity, relationality, reflexivity, responsibility and reflectivity, when it's opened out to the exigencies of authenticity as the normative path to beauty, truth, goodness and love in every area of life. My disagreement with Marx's meaning-making, grounded in the doing of his subjectivity, illustrates this point. The issue of objectivity Regarding the issue of objectivity, the imaginative exercise also illustrates that authentic subjectivity resolves the subject-object issue for spirituality as an academic discipline. It does so by showing that there's no out there now objectivity, but only the objectivity mediated methodologically by faithful participation in the dynamic process of authentic subjectivity. And this position means that authentic subjectivity in the researcher and objectivity in their research outcomes are correlative. Regarding the point about inclusivity of life views, regarding the first aspect of the issue of inclusivity, namely inclusivity with respect to life views, studying spirituality in terms of the innate spirit of authenticity and common human subjectivity provides a way of focusing on what people have in common in developing their life views and world views. It also provides a way to explain the different paths they take by drawing attention to variations in data attended to, questions asked, interpretations arrived at, judgments made, and decisions taken. When differences that arise can be explained in terms of how people function differently from such a common methodological foundation, due in part to differences in socialization and historical contexts, there is an intelligible basis for dialogue and cooperation. My treatment of Marx illustrates this point. Regarding the second aspect of the issue of inclusivity, namely spirituality in the professions and spirituality in other disciplines, by establishing the content of the field of spirituality according to the scope of the spirit of authenticity, and by engaging in the study of that field-encompassing field as a search for both the presence and absence of authenticity in the functioning of the operations of experiencing, understanding, judging and deciding, constitutive of people's knowing and deciding, and the extent to which what they produce in that way correlates with the beauty, intelligibility, truth, goodness and love that authenticity desires in specific instances, this all makes spirituality an inherently interdisciplinary discipline. It does so because every discipline can shed light on spirituality's focus on the quality of fidelity to the spirit of authenticity that individuals and collectives function with in relation to the mystery of existence and lived experience in diverse settings. They also shed light on the extent to which what people produce in that way are specific expressions or not of beauty, intelligibility, truth, goodness and love. The same goes for the professions and indeed all available resources, including therefore art, nature, music, etc., and practices like prayer, pilgrimage and silence, etc. These are all resources that can be drawn because they can all tell us a bit about whether we're being authentic or not. But besides what diverse disciplines, professions and other resources can offer to spirituality studies, spirituality in the university can also serve all these resources of learning, because it's a two-way street, because academic disciplines and professions function necessarily under the impact of the tension between authenticity and inauthenticity in individuals and collectives, and so can be studied to learn when and how the meaning and skills they offer are expressions, or not, of experiencing, understanding, judging and deciding at the standard of authenticity. That gives a spirituality dimension to the diverse disciplines and professions. It means they are expressing themselves in terms of spirituality, the spirituality of authenticity, and highlights the need for those engaged in them to become familiar with and gain competence in appropriating and applying their own practices of authentic subjectivity as integral to their studies and training. Right, we're getting near the end. Spirituality, as the name suggests, studies spirit. I have made a case for spirituality studies in the university to focus on the enlightening and empowering spirit of authenticity in human subjectivity. This dynamic spirit at the core of our subjectivity is mediated to us by desire. Desire that functions through the sensibility permeating the self-transcending operations of experiencing, understanding, judging and deciding. Desire seeking to give expression to itself through its exigent effects on these foundational operations so that they function normatively as they can, towards discovering or developing concrete instances of beauty, intelligibility, truth, goodness and love in our lives, the lives of others and the life of the world as their objective fruits. Desire seeking to be faithful to itself in this process in the face of forces that could obstruct or oppose it, and desire strengthened and sustained by factors favourable to it, including religious factors and experiences that can even reground and elevate it, thus providing evidence in its everyday manifestations of a mysterious higher order reality beyond and within this world. Researching and studying spirituality in this way brings the entire fund of knowledge, decision and future possibility within its field of inquiry and practice, because it establishes the field of spirituality according to the scope of the desiring spirit of authenticity, and provides a way to evaluate past, present and future relationships, lives, organisations, traditions and universities, etc., which lie within the field according to the spiritual quality of authenticity evident in them. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for such a stimulating lecture. And the words and concepts of authenticity and kindness are huge for me personally, so I was resonating big time in the front row. We have time for just a couple of questions if we're very quick. We started a bit late because of all the changes to the program, but I am mindful that we need to get across for other presentations. So if you can make your questions very, very direct and brief, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael, for a marvelous presentation. My question then is about an assumption, and I'm just wondering if it's fair to say that there's an assumed foundation for the methodology of authentic subjectivity that you bring forward. And that concerns the horizon that you set forth before the methodology. So what you're saying, the spirit of authenticity has a horizon of beauty, truth, goodness, and love. So the missing piece for me in that equation or in that frame is an anthropological model out of which the human functions, or answering the question, what does it mean to be human, to operate in the way that you're suggesting here. So I think that's the presumed assumption. There is a model there, and I'm just wondering if you could say something about that, or is that a question that could be explored further elsewhere?
Well, the imaginative experiment was designed really to try and let us discover for ourselves and to verify for ourselves that this is the way we function when we can. That the horizon that opens up to us when we allow ourselves to be led by this inner spirit is one that desires the truth of the situation and the good to be done in it. And so we're discovering that this is the way we are as humans through this actual practice, this experiment. That was my aim anyway in doing that experiment, was to try and let that come out. And that it's not just an idea I'm proposing or a theory even, it's something we can actually discover to be the case about ourselves when we engage with ourselves in a concrete instance of trying to see if I want to reach beauty, truth, goodness and love in life, how am I to know how to do it? And I say, okay, give me an example of where I'm engaged in such a situation, and let me attend to myself as I engage with the situation. And what do I discover? I discover that I have this kind of spiritual desire, and that as I follow it, it opens me out into this horizon of beauty, truth, goodness and love that it's calling me to come to. And so the human being is a being constituted with this spirit and with this horizon as the correlative of the spirit and its desire.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dale.
Thanks, Michael, for great talk. The first point, just a quick comment, is that authentic subjectivity is now corroborated by quantum science as well. And we draw from that because we create and observe the universe that we create together. So that is actually much bigger support now for authentic subjectivity. So that's one quick point. But the two questions I have for you, one is that you were going to give us three S's, S1, S2, S3, but I only saw S1. I don't know if I missed it.
Oh.
But S2 and S3 didn't seem to be there. So I'd like to see that.
We went through them quickly, Michael.
The slides, yeah.
The slides, yeah.
Okay, and the question that I really have is the MA in Applied Spirituality here faithful to all the principles that you have outlined?
Yes.
Yeah, well, very quickly, narrate. S1 is what we're talking about, the way we are innately with the spirit of this desiring spirit That's reaching for beauty, truth, goodness and love. That was S1. S2 is the ways in which we sort of live that out, whether we do it faithfully or unfaithfully. And I gave an example of my going to Chile as an example of how I was led to express this experience in myself that became religiously regrounded when I was a small boy, that I was led to go out to Chile as a missionary to address the situation of oppression out there, which was influenced by this experience I'd had as a small boy, which had to do with how to be authentic in my life. And so S2 is about how do I give expression to this desiring spirit in me, and people do that differently. And then S3 is about how to study all that, which is what the paper was mainly trying to do. So we take Karl Marx. How would you study him now with this framework, and what can you learn by doing that? And people say, oh, you're studying Karl Marx in a spirituality course. Well, you see, it just shows you that spirituality takes in everybody and everything.
And just a final question here, but very brief, so that everyone doesn't have to run.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Michael. That was a really fascinating talk. Got a quick question. So, although I'm sort of here talking about pilgrimage and stuff like that, most of my career has been in the film and TV industry. And what I found myself falling into is coaching film directors and producers and so on who are in a very cutthroat freelance business. And I've found that the spirituality that I have is at the core of how I coach people. But if I said where that spirituality came from, they would run a mile from me. So the question is, how and when does spirituality come out of the closet?
Very good.
Well, being authentic, as you know, means first of all attending to all the relevant data, and you've just given that there are data there to be attended to and then thought about, and then to see what decision to take in the light of it. So the answer to when to come out is it can only be arrived at after you've attended to the data, asked the questions that are there to be asked about it, come to a judgment and then taking a decision. So there's no a priori answer. I can only say to you, look, this is the method to follow to come to an answer, and if you follow that method, you'll come to an answer that you can stand over for yourself.
It's been a really rich discussion. Thank you.